Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar event sponsored by Making Our Strong Communities Stronger Collaborative. The Making Our Strong Communities Stronger Collaborative continues to gain momentum in the mainframe industry, where we bring this community together through webinar programming, which maybe you've already joined one in the past, conversations, receptions at industry events like Share, and then on social media, we have a LinkedIn channel that you can check out if you haven't already. Today's webinar is titled LOL or BRB, Decoding Millennial and Gen Z Workplace Communication. My name is Evelyn Hoover, and I am the editor-in-chief for Tech Channel, and we're proud to be part of this brilliant and dynamic mainframe industry. A big thank you to our sponsoring members who make today's event possible: BMC, Broadcom Mainframe Software, IBM, the Open Mainframe Project, Rocket Software, and Tech Channel. As you're logging in, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. So the webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared on our LinkedIn page so you can view it on demand. We'd also love it if you would share it with your colleagues and friends, anybody who might be interested in this topic. And also note that you will be muted for the duration of the panel discussion. However, we do, encourage questions or comments, so you can put those in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the discussion. So with housekeeping complete, I'd like to welcome everyone to what promises to be a great event. And I'm going to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Gloria Chance. Dr. Chance is a CEO and innovative leader of the Masai Group, an executive advisory and leadership development firm. She's led many of our past webinar events. She's an award-winning keynote speaker, specifically in the tech and banking industries. She's also an award-winning talk show host, author, and so much more. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Chance.
Thank you, Evelyn, and hello and welcome to everyone. And thank you for joining us today as we look at how we're going to bridge communication between generations. As we look at today's world in our workplace, I don't think I have to list the things and issues and challenges that surround us as we are challenged with misinformation, disinformation, all around communications. But these all things lead to assumptions. And when assumptions, digital shorthand, or hierarchical norms get in the way, bridges to effective communication can break down. What we all need to understand is our personal mythology, in other words, how we grew up, usually dictates how we think, how we behave, how we make decisions, and how we communicate. So this session today invites us all to explore how trust, curiosity, and authenticity can transform everyday interactions into opportunities for deeper connection and understanding across all levels of the workplace. So I'm going to ask you a question in the audience before we even get started. And I know you're probably not ready, so get ready, because we want to know, how confident are you in the workplace in understanding emojis and different languages that are used by other generations? And yeah, this is happening in the workplace right now. We are literally saying these things: BRB, LOL, TBH. Some of these things, I don't even know what they are. I always have to go and look them up. Who does that? I cheat and I will say something like, what does this mean? Okay. So if you could go ahead and answer this question for us. How confident are you in understanding any of these choices? Choose the one that you're most comfortable with. Do this now. And we can't wait to hear your response. And while we're waiting, did you know that just by being curious, that you can open up serious, important communications? So for example, just by asking a person about their idea, like you heard them talk about an idea, hey, can you tell me more? Or maybe, you're interested, you saw them walking around with something like this. I have a cassette player as my phone holder. So what, a cassette player holder. So what does that say about me? That probably says that I grew up around the time that there were cassette players. So being curious, noticing things about people can actually help you also open up a conversation and communication so that you can know more about them, and also increase the possibility of having further dialogue, further inquiry, and better connections at work. Okay, so do we have any answers? Okay, so it looks like, oh my goodness. We pretty much have, okay, this is math. I didn't know it's going to be doing math right now. Okay, so we got about 40 something. Okay. Um, Looks like we're all over the place is basically what it is, but better than I think. I think that the fluency 52% is very high. It's more than I thought, although it's 52%. So that means that there's about 48% of the people who know the basics, and a few others. And about maybe it looks like here, according to this, we got other people who don't have a clue. So this is interesting and I think important for the conversation that we're about to have. So, coming up, we're going to introduce our panelists, and I'm curious about what they think about this particular topic. And we have with us today Aaron Seeger, who is the marketing manager at Tech Channel and oversees the marketing strategies, both internal and external. And we have Lily McFadden, who's a QA developer intern at IBM, and she's graduating this Saturday from Merritt's University. Congratulations. And then we have Andy Wigg, who's a senior editor at Tech Channel. Andy joined Tech Channel in 2024, so he's fairly new, and with Tech Channel, but has been writing for over a decade. And then we have Brennan Glover, who is an onboarding and employee development manager who has 12 years as an HR veteran. And then last but not least, we have Liz Joseph, who's the global head of open source program office for IBM Z and Linux One. And so welcome panelists. And I want to jump right in because when I grew up, there were a bunch of wars and violence and fight for freedom, but some really good Motown music. So you can kind of get an idea. And what's curious about when you talk about these things is if you don't understand what that person's saying, that means that you probably have a generation gap. But that's when you can get curious. Oh, tell me more. Exactly why were there wars? What did you feel about the wars, etc.? And so that's how I grew up. But based on your generation, and right now on this panel, we have Gen Z and we have Millennial. So we specifically have this focused on the younger generations. And they'll tell you who they are based on when and how they grew up. And so we'll start with Liz. Based on when you grew up, how do you adapt your communication style when you're working with other people in the workplace? How do you adjust it and why?
That's a great question. So, I'm Liz, and I'm what we call an elder millennial. So I was born in 1981. And I look at my history and technology, and it's funny because I grew up, there was a black and white TV in my bedroom. But by the time I graduated high school, I had my own website that I, self-taught HTML and CSS. So I kind of, I saw this progression to the internet age, and computers have color now. But
And
as far as
TV, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and TVs. But as far as adapting my communication style, one of the things that I discovered, it's some more recently, is that some of the tools that we use to communicate with each other, have implicit assumptions about that come from the people who built them. So, for instance, in Slack, the the default agreement emoji is the thumbs up. And I've been told recently that thumbs up is not cool.
Oh,
I think people use it more ironically, sometimes in younger generations. And so I've become more aware of my own biases.
but let me ask though, Liz,
Mhm.
did you find out what do you use in place of the thumbs up? Because sometimes the keyboards don't have all the options, or do they?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure what I'm supposed
Oh
to do.
no, okay, for sure, yes. And so this says that right, we're not none of us are experts in this generation stuff, which is why we're having this conversation, because you at least need to start the conversation to understand because it can wreak havoc. But I love how you express that, Liz. Thank you so much. Lily.
So hi, I'm Lily. I am actually kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm a Gen Zer. I was born in '02. Um, as it comes to emojis, I didn't even know that using a thumbs up wasn't always seen as a good thing. I just see that as like oh, you like the message, you acknowledge what you read, and you're good with that. So,
You
but
know, and while can I interrupt, Lily,
yeah,
because
go
I
for
think
it.
our audience is like they're panelists also. Like I'm cracking up because someone said Ricardo said the thumbs up meaning has been diluted over time. Now it feels like a faint praise.
Yeah.
Praise, yeah, a faint praise. So I'm taking that in all different kinds of ways. But thank you for that, Ricardo. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when it comes to like my communication style, especially since I'm a lot newer to the industry, I was always told, and I'm coming from like a classroom setting, especially since I'm finishing up my education still. I was always told, oh, wait, if you have a question, don't be afraid to ask it because more likely than less, someone else is thinking the same thing. So I
Mhm.
kind of carry that right over to the workplace. So if someone's talking to me super technical and I'm not fully understanding, I'm going to ask the questions that I need to clarify, especially if I'm needing those answers in order to get a clear answer. So, and
Exactly. And so, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say, as come like different emojis to use, I know my team, we use there's like a thank you emoji to acknowledge things or like a sounds good. So there can be a whole variety, but thumbs up also works.
Okay, got you, Aaron. So you're basically saying that for you, having effective communication, regardless of emojis or whatever, is that not being afraid to ask questions, especially as a new young person. Yes. So, Aaron, what say you, being another new
Mhm.
younger person?
Yeah, so I am also Gen Z. I was born in 99, so I'm closer to kind of like the cusp of Millennial and Gen Z. So, I grew up with like internet and technology, but we also had more landlines and then cell phones. But yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely in the workplace, I lean towards more being clear and concise, especially with older generations. Um, Sometimes this might be a personal thing, but I sometimes don't know that I explain myself very well over email or text or anything like that. So I tend to also like meetings more so I can show them what I'm trying to do.
Oh my
And
God, you like meetings. Oh my
I
goodness,
do
I thought meetings were
sometimes.
going away.
I
Okay.
know. Well, I think sometimes, like, depending on the context and like what you're trying to explain, I think sometimes it's just way easier to get the point across.
But I think that's interesting to know because we all make assumptions about generations. And one of the assumptions that I hear about, I'm not saying I made it, but I hear a lot of HR people talk about Gen Z. They want to start work one day and they want to like be VP the next day. So, and Brennan's laughing over there as an HR person. I'm not saying you said that, Brennan. What are your thoughts though on this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I am, I guess, somewhat, I guess, middle, like younger millennial. I was born in 1991. And I think for my generation, you understand, like, my parents had pagers when I was a kid, right? And elementary school, we communicated via calculators. You can, like, type in hello and share it with the person behind you.
Seriously? The
Yeah.
entire calculators? Wow.
See, calculators, graphic calculators, we were doing all those kind of things. And then you get to my high school years, even though college, we had a T9 texting. So we didn't have a full keypad, right? So a lot of our communication was definitely like short form. It was really, really quick because we weren't allowed to have phones in school. So I was texting in my pocket. I don't know how I was able to do that. Then going to the workplace
Okay,
where I didn't have
but
a
hold
phone.
up. Wait, Brennan, wait a minute, because Kelia in the chat is saying she remembers the calculator texting days. But how did y'all communicate? Like, did it have a little Wi-Fi or what? How did that? I'm
Oh no,
sorry, I
we
don't
would
mean to. This is crazy.
you could pass the calculator. So like in your graphing calculator, you can write a whole paragraph and you just hand the person the actual calculator.
Oh, I see. So it was a manual handoff. Like
Yeah.
when I grew up, we used to put the documents in this thing that went downstairs. I forgot what you call those, the dumb waiters, where it would go like from upstairs to downstairs. But anyway,
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
aging myself. So,
Yeah.
Brennan, thank you. Is there anything else there you want to add?
Yeah. Or even I think the I guess the original formats we do forget. Like my generation, we were definitely AIM. Now when you say AIM, it's like, what is that? What is AOL chat? So these are some of the things that like I think that we have to give for the context to understand like why people communicate. the reason, the way that they
Well,
actually do it.
exactly. And that's really the point of this question, is that we all have such a rich background in, like, and I was a CIO and take pride in knowing a lot of tech. And I really missed out on the calculator thing. And why? Because I wasn't in school then. You all who were in school, you experienced that. And that's a communication thing that you have collectively that you don't even know about until right now. Like, I am shocked at the number of people who are talking about calculator texting. Wow. Andy, what else you got?
Yeah, so I'm an elder millennial, like Liz. I graduated high school in the year 2000, so I was kind of part of the first wave of millennials to become adults. But I remember just growing up, like, I mean, I think back then, really all written communication was kind of formal, right? Like informal text style written communication wasn't really a thing. I remember learning about like how to do how to format like a formal letter and say like fifth grade or something. You put like your address in the upper left and all that, and so it's like I don't think they teach that kind of thing anymore. Maybe.
Right, because I don't even think cursive is taught anymore. But go
Right.
ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And so like when it comes to it, I didn't get a cell phone until freshman and sophomore year of college. I didn't start texting until a few years after that even. And so like certain things like that, like so, like one assumption I make is really like when I'm communicating with somebody from Gen Z over like text or like a Teams chat or a Slack channel, one of those things, like I assume that I shouldn't end my sentences or end the message in a period because I've been told that can come up as kind of stern or unfriendly. So that's one of the assumptions I operate under.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because there was one time, well, when I was working on my doctorate, but another time when I worked with technical writers, and they were very like specific about what they call them, like termination clauses, like whether it was a period or exclamation point or something. And right, that can be very stressful in terms of trying to conform. So what we're talking about in this, what we just reviewed, is in some ways about this pressure you're mentioning, Andy, to conform and do it right, just based on assumptions that you're seeing and reading. Like if everybody's doing the period, then maybe that's the right way to do it, etc. Maybe if we're using calculators, had I seen people texting via calculators, maybe I would have conformed to do that. A lot of the way that we communicate is about conforming in an environment, but if everybody's really different and nobody's even understanding how we're communicating, when you think about your communication style, when do you feel the most free to be yourself? Because if there's all this pressure about different communication pathways, different things meaning different things, and you don't even know, when have you felt comfortable? When has it worked for you to be comfortable in your communication style at work? And when was that time when you felt comfortable to really be yourself? So Liz, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'd say definitely the technical conversations are my strong point, because I tend to be very direct, and very to the point when I'm speaking on technical topics, and that's very much me. And I don't know if that's necessarily a generational thing, but I know it can sometimes be a little intimidating to not younger people, but people who are newer to something I might be speaking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Lily, you have an experience you want to share about working with a technical person.
Yeah, so as stated before, I'm an intern. I'm actually finishing up my internship just in a couple days, and then I'll transition to full time after I graduate. But when I started my internship, my team is quite large and we're a 24/7 run team. So there's people who are based in the US and then there's people who are also based in India. And when I started my internship, especially since I was new to the team, and there's a lot of things that happen within my team, they have all of the interns and even just new hires do these one-on-one meetings where you get to know different people on the team, learn about what they do, and so on and so forth. So it was like one of my like second or third days on the job, and I had this one-on-one meeting scheduled with someone who is definitely like in like the baby boomer era, had been there for a very long time, very bright man.
They're really ancient, yes. Uh-huh.
But he was supposed to co-present this one-on-one with one of his colleagues to break down, since they were like representing that full sub team on what they did. And it was supposed to be a 30-minute meeting. and she ended up having to cancel. So it was just him running the meeting. It was supposed to be 30 minutes to cover all of the content, make sure all my questions were answered, and get a full feel for that team. And he flew through that content in probably about 5 to 7 minutes, and super technical, a lot of acronyms, just way over my head. Again, third day on the job. I totally new to this kind of industry. And then he was like, all right, any questions? And I just remember sitting there and I was just like, no, I'm good. And I just remember, I think since it was like so early into the internship, I was a little afraid to ask about like, I need you to repeat everything that you just said.
Exactly. So, and a little bit more slowly. And like, how do you even ask for what you need?
Exactly.
No, that is really a perfect story about coming into something new.
Yeah, and I think we don't necessarily mean to be like that. I mean, people like very like I want people to ask questions, but I do, see that sometimes I need to slow down.
Yeah.
Sure. So you're saying, Liz, because you're super technical, and you're seeing a time when, as a person, and being super technical also implies that you have experience, right? That implies background, you understand the acronyms, you know how things go together. So speak a little bit more, Liz, to Lily about what's going on in your mind when that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone with more experience, we can sometimes forget what it's like to be someone who's new to things. And we just, we know these acronyms so well, we know all the concepts so well that it's hard for us to reapproach things. So we want new people to come and slow us down and help us make the communication better.
Yeah, no, and it was a bit of a learning curve, especially for my mentor and I, because like my mentor for the summer, he's a millennial himself, and I was the very first person he ever had as like a mentee or an intern of any sort. So it took probably a good couple of attempts for him to really get used to like I need to break this down a little bit more. And once we got into our groove, we were pretty solid. And I know
that makes total sense. But I think the key takeaway here, I think for everyone, especially here and in the audience, it's important to understand that if you're a subject matter expert, the important thing is to explain things in a non-technical way. I mean, that's something that for me has always been really important in my career as initially an engineer, then a CIO, and now as a psychologist. Like when you break things down in plain spoken words, then you don't have to worry about anyone not understanding what you're saying. So Brennan, as we wrap up on this question, what do you have to say about all that you've heard?
Yeah, I think sometimes we focus on one-way communication and not two-way communication, right? It's what the person who's leading the meeting is saying versus, okay, is there a responsibility in the room for someone to communicate back and say, hey, I don't get what you're saying, right? So for me, the best environments that I've been in, it starts before the communication. It's when you can create a psychological safe space in that room, in that group, that we all have a common goal. And I'm sorry, I have a football background, but that is to win the game, right? And when we have that trust in the room, we know if I'm like, hey, run that back one more time. I don't know what you just said. It's not that I'm not knowledgeable or I wasn't listening. It's just that I literally don't understand what you're saying. So from an HR standpoint, one of the things I always push is that communication truly builds the culture in the company. If you can have that transparent communication, if you can build that psychological safe space, that tends to lead to your higher performing teams.
And that is so true. Thank you for that, because a psychologically safe space, to your point, can help you navigate through miscommunications, right? And we know today with, again, the miscommunication, disinformation, and misunderstandings, that it's so easy to not just have lack of clarity, but also it can deteriorate trust. And so while we've had fun looking back, and I'm still cracking up at some of the comments, I hope we can get to some of them about like all of the different emojis and how we're communicating. But the serious part of this is that there are major consequences when we miscommunicate, and particularly around trust. The thing about trust is you can say it's nothing, but the definition of trust is about like, I believe that you will be here. Be here meaning that you are credible, that you will stand up to do what you say you're going to do, right? You have integrity. That's what trust is about. And when that gets broken, it can break how we do work, how we execute, and how productive we are. And so, Andy, can you share a time when you had a miscommunication issue and it had real consequences? Like it maybe created mistrust in you or the other person, and how you resolve that?
Yeah. So going back to a previous job, there was a time when I was new on the job, like it was the first week, and I was there was a team member who I worked closely with, but we had different disciplines, and we were just talking about a project, and I just said, like, man, I'd love to help you out with this. Like, like, can I, how can I help you out here? And maybe I can take on certain aspect of this project. And this person, looked at me and smiled and said, "Are you trying to take my job?" And they said it lighthearted, and we both kind of laughed, and we just moved on. But then, later on, I was kind of reflecting. I realized, like, well, actually, she was kind of trying to send me a message, like, back off, like, kind of stay in your lane. And so, I mean, the consequence of that initially was just, I felt kind of embarrassed that I had maybe, overstepped my bounds a little bit. And I was really just kind of trying to demonstrate enthusiasm and willingness to pitch in wherever needed. But, that was kind of initially interpreted a different way. I think because that person was a pretty adept communicator, she was able to kind of make it, get that message out smoothly where it didn't really harm our relationship. So I
But in
ended
the back of your mind, did you make an assumption
did I make an assumption
about the intent of the
about
communication? Yes.
about I assumed that person's intent was to send the message that I should just do my job and not try to take hers.
Exactly. And so, what we're trying to talk about here is another form of communication or miscommunication that either executives, leaders, or peers can do to each other. And again, part of we're not doing basic communication, which is we know we have to listen and, for what, instead of trying to think of the next thing we want to say, we should be paying attention to how having empathy and how people are responding or reacting to what we're saying. And so if someone had looked at your expression, Andy, if that this person had, what would she likely have seen?
The expression when she was talking, I mean, in the moment we were both smiling and laughing because it was a lighthearted exchange, but that had, a message behind it.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I Ricardo again, I just noticed jumped in and said that this was saying, "Don't take my job," is typical of extremely competitive societies where the norm is some sort of zero sum game. So back to Brennan, it's about the culture. If you experience this kind of communication, and it's also an opportunity for you to understand yourself. So in that, Andy, what did you understand that you were going to do?
I understood that going forward, I'm never gonna ask or never gonna offer to help anyone ever again.
Right, which is
uh,
a terrible thing to learn, which I'm sure you didn't do. But you can
yeah,
see again back to how important the communication and lack of and miscommunication can be, because Andy, there will be some people who will have this experience and say, "I'm never ever going to do this again." So definitely it has consequences. But let's hear from the rest of the panel just real briefly. When you have experienced this type of either misinformation, disinformation, or coerced, someone trying to make you do something with that communication, what have been some of the feelings that you've had?
I mean, I would definitely say internal anxiety. I've had experiences where when I entered the workforce, I would say issues around like D&I diversity, it was not as welcome, right? And it's only 12 years ago. So I didn't feel safe saying, hey, like I may have taken this wrong based on we have different backgrounds. So I would just kind of pull myself away into a dark room and just live in that moment. And I didn't feel safe saying anything. But I've learned that when you don't say something, it's that feeling's not going to go anywhere. So you have to put yourself in a situation to respectfully have a conversation, just to gain understanding. Because I'm sure that person assumed best intent. That person did not want to make you feel that feeling of despair or anxiety.
Well, and what I will add to that, Brendan, is for everyone, this is the definition of anxiety. It is pretty basic. It is they trying to do something about something you have no control over. That's my basic, simple definition of it. Because when you can control something, then the anxiety goes away. So, in other words, if you can't control it, you almost have to leave it alone, or it does increase anxiety because you keep trying and trying and trying, and you can't do anything about it. So, it's important to know, though, that the minute, if you can do something about it, which is speak up, the anxiety goes away. So that person may have created anxiety inside of you, but you can make it go away by taking action. It feels uncomfortable, but the minute you do it, you actually have pride, etc., for standing up for yourself. Let's hear again from another panelist about what feeling have you experienced when you're in a situation similar to Andy?
Yeah, I'd say for me, like embarrassment for sure. And I think for me, embarrassment can be crippling. And so sometimes I can't, bring myself to say something, when I'm in that situation. So even though it would probably make things better and would make me feel
So
better,
you shut
sometimes.
down. So
Mhm.
the shutting down is fight or flight, which in our anxiety model, we have that, right? It's like either I'm going to fight, which I will tend to fight, or I'm going to run. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing as shutting down. And
Yeah,
so
and I
again,
will I will think about it, like, I'll go back and be like, "Okay, how can I make this right?" But I have to do that in a different space, and then I'll come back and repair that relationship or, make a comment later to clarify. And sometimes, it's funny because I feel this intense embarrassment, but the person I'm talking to may not be aware of that, so I'll come back and be like, "Oh, about our interaction earlier," and they will have forgotten all about it, and everything's fine, but for me,
it
it's
was
definitely
not. And so
Mhm.
also what we're getting after is the neurodiversity opportunity as well, right? Because if you're ADHD or any of the other neurodiverse challenges, the opportunity, it's really for all of us because we're on a continuum, right? And everybody gets anxious and nervous when they think they've done something wrong or something, unless you're a narcissist, you are going to be worried about whether you're doing something right. So I think that the key point of this conversation about miscommunications and also deteriorating trust is how do you understand how you feel when you're not being communicated to in the correct way so that you can also shift and learn how is it that you need to communicate with others. And so as we continue, who else wants to jump in on this topic of how do you feel when communication happens and it leads to mistrust? Who haven't we heard from? Lily, Aaron.
Yeah, I would probably say a mix of just confusion, that embarrassment, very similar to what Liz was saying. I sometimes when I realize that I didn't fully understand what the previous conversation was about or what they were trying to say to me, I have to think and I'll be like, okay, I actually do need to go back and ask that question or get that clarification. So it can definitely be a learning curve and a process to figure that out. And it's okay if it's not done the first time.
Right. And so this topic also leads us into when we talk about trust, being authentic, right? So being real is what makes communication work. I think Brennan mentioned, hey, I don't get it. Can you just say it again? Like, I just don't understand. Just being real, just saying, like, you know what? I was really bad when I took, whatever, coding course. I failed that. So can you go slower? It's just like being authentic. So we've talked about just now all the reasons why humans don't really want to communicate what's really going on because when we feel embarrassed, when we feel anxious, when we have all of these things, it doesn't feel good. And I think Liz mentioned she goes away, then she comes back and she's doing all these gyrations, and the person she's worried about doesn't even know or remember what was going on. So the question is professionalism, your ability to be professional, ever in conflict with being real? How do you navigate that tension? Because sometimes, to Andy's earlier point, just put the period on the sentence. You know what I'm saying? Just be quiet and nod and say, okay. But but can you do that? Is that okay? And there's also, you all mentioned something about code switching for survival, like
Yeah.
trying to be perfect. Professionalism and the stress of it all, just trying to make sure that you stay in the right communication space because you don't want to step out of line. Go ahead, Brennan.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. It's funny. I was having a conversation with my wife about it and how professionalism is a moving target, right? When I started in the workplace, we had casual Fridays where it was a big deal. We could wear jeans to the office. Now I wear t-shirts, and a lot of that nonverbal communication, it has definitely changed. So I'll say, referring to that period, if you're yourself authentically, people know who you are. So if I miss the period, if I don't put the period, I'm still selling myself, right? Like they know that it's just the way that I communicate versus if I'm not authentic, I never give you a chance to understand who I truly am. So people can't read you. Like people don't feel safe to ask you a question. So going back to just creating that psychological safe space, I think that's important. And then we don't have to worry about whether something's professional or not because I'm bringing my entire self to the office. But also, I trust myself that I'm able to act accordingly in certain spaces. So I deem to shy away from the word professional just because it's a moving target. Think about 40 years ago versus now. Certain things we do in the office would be deemed horrendous 40 years ago versus it's way more acceptable now.
Yeah, it's like in the 50s, which I don't think this has come back yet, and I'm not advocating for this, and this don't judge me for making this comment. But remember in the 50s, where especially the marketing people, I think, they had like alcohol in their office and even ice and everything. So that was like a full kind of thing that has not come back and should probably not come back. But I'm just saying that you're right that the ways of work have definitely evolved and they continue to evolve as we start to introduce AI. And I think your point, Brendan, about you're talking about personal branding too, and the importance of knowing who you are. I just
Uh-oh, hopefully it didn't get too stormy.
Okay, I do believe we're in a storm. And I can just jump right in. And basically one of the takeaways that I'm hearing you say, Brennan, is that authenticity allows effective communication. I think a point that Dr. Chance was mentioning was about personal branding, where you said, you're kind of representing yourself in a sense, right? Each time you speak, and then that also allows, like if you do leave off a period, it allows for someone to better understand you, in that way. Is that kind of what you were
Yeah,
saying?
and it definitely takes time. I know there's a few people on the call who worked with me in the past. It's like if I'm too like uptight, which I think sometimes we look at uptight and professional as the same things, they're gonna be like, "What's wrong with Brennan? Like he's not being his usual self." So I think just bringing your whole self to work, which I know is extremely tough, but the more you're able to do that, and then trust yourself that you know how to act, you know how to have perfect decorum. When I'm on the basketball court, I am different because it's just different set of rules, right? So just trust yourself, bring yourself to work, and I think that communication will flow more evenly, and people will feel more open to ask you questions in case there is a misunderstanding.
Absolutely, absolutely. Aaron, what do you have to say about this? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm very myself at work. I think the people who know me would agree. But I definitely think there's situations where I do feel like I have to mask, more specifically like in client meetings or if I'm speaking to a higher up or something like that. I think it's better to be professional and to like a lot of the clients I work with, it's virtual. Like I don't know how old they are. I don't know that person. So I was try to be professional and respectful and because I don't know them and where they're coming from.
And it takes some time, right, to develop that, for them to get a sense of you, your personality, and also the same for them. Andy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. Yeah, I think similar to what Brennan was saying, I think, I don't think like the tone you approach something with or your appearance, I think you can have a casual tone and appearance and still be professional. But I think, time and a place for everything, right? And so there's dials to turn up and down. And that I don't think that means, if you have your professional mask on, I don't think that has to mean that you're being inauthentic. I think it helps to like have like maybe like an authentic foundation that people know. So, whatever kind of mask you're wearing on a certain day, they kind of know maybe what's underneath there. And I think that kind of thing can help build trust.
Yeah, sure, sure. And one of the comments is that I find that a big communication problem is a lack of tolerance. Instead of asking questions for clarification, many people quickly jump to feeling insulted. Take a breath and ask first. What do you guys think about that as advice? Liz, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as a rule, I assume good intent. And I don't, I'm not really quick, I think, to take offense. At least I hope not. So, and clarity, I mean, it's like one of my top things. Like I really want to make sure that we're on the same page. So I do strive for that, but I do see what they're saying as well.
Sure, sure, sure.
And I
So,
do think that's
go ahead.
interesting because I think it's the basis of why do we want to communicate. And for me, we communicate to learn, right? So there have been times I've said something that I know unintentionally I offended somebody, but for me, let's not end it there. Let me build that psychological safe space. Sorry, that's the HR me coming out, so I can understand. Hey, what did I do wrong, right? And vice versa. Hey, maybe this is maybe you took it a certain way, but regardless, just like let's just communicate our way out of this situation. Versus too many times we communicate, then we stop, we hit the brick wall, and we expect something to come from it. The only way to overcome, I guess, bad communication is to communicate our way out of it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned psychological safe space because it's like, you're taking it upon yourself to see that, hey, maybe I miscommunicated something and let me take an extra step to maybe correct that, so we can level set and get more clarity, right? And so yeah, I definitely see the importance of that. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So I think the next thing we're gonna kind of shift. So, we're talking about authenticity. Some of the things that come up are trust, being your authentic self at work, being professional. You mentioned psychological safe space. But the next thing I kind of want to, next thing kind of want to pivot to is this idea of personality, right? Your personality at work. Is it the same at home as it is at work? How well are you balancing this idea of professionalism and because we show up with work as, with everything that comes with it, right? The things that we're dealing with, the things that we're going through, and that impacts the workplace. It impacts how we communicate. So if we've got that poll, let's take it to the audience and let's ask the question, right? So my personality is the same at home and at work. What say you? Do you feel like this is true? Do you struggle with it? Is it easy? Okay, the results are coming in. Wow. Okay. Okay. So right now it looks like okay, it's fluctuating. It looks like a majority of people say that yes, it's the same at home and at work. 33% disagree. Okay. All right. All right. Um, Lily, what would you say to that? Do you feel like that you are able to be the same both at home and what's more in line with your personality?
I feel like coming from someone a lot newer to the industry, I tend to kind of mask a little bit more. And even when you were reading those results, I was from like a Gen Z perspective, I was a little bit more surprised. I would have expected more people to say false because I feel like I when I'm in like a work setting and I kind of see things in kind of a hierarchical type way that people who have been here longer than me, whether it's just other fellow employees or even like my managers and stuff, I feel like I was always taught to be a bit more professional with them and try and get a good read for the room for to see how I need to kind of like almost like mask in and kind of like blend in to make sure I'm not like a huge outlier. But I feel like also I could be on a totally different realm of other Gen Zers to where they're like, oh, I'm just going to be myself. And that's that. So I don't know. That's personally just me. I think it also depends on the type of setting that you're talking in. Like if I'm talking to my coworkers at like lunch or something, I feel like I can show a little bit more of my personality, but I don't feel like it ever fully comes out, at least as of
Absolutely.
now.
I think there's a level of confidence there as well, because I found early in my career, I felt like I needed to be more professional. And part of that also is gender related, because I felt in order to be taken seriously as a technical woman, I needed to dress the part and I needed to speak in a way that people found me to be technical. So I think there's parts of our culture that play a role in here as well. And as I've gotten older and more senior in my role and more confident in my abilities, I'm just me now. Like I'm actually very silly and I have a lot of fun at work. But it's all built on that confidence and that experience.
Liz,
Wow.
I think that's a great point. Same way, when I first started, just to be transparent, you know, here I am, an African American in HR, which is African American male in HR, which is not a very common thing. I want to say intimidated, but I was nervous that whatever I said could be taken in the wrong context. So everything that I said was literally like I was thinking about it 4 times in my head, like, and I would be so stressed out by the time I said it. Then I was not myself. But I think with seniority and experience, you just learn that hey, I got here because this is who I am. This is why people want me. And I think the biggest mistake that I can tell people is when you're not yourself, you're not giving your all to the company. Like they need our different flavors and our different vibes. And as you go along in your career, you'll realize time and place. But I think Liz had a great word, which is confidence. That definitely allows you to bring your complete self to the office.
Liz and Brendan, thank you so much. You've introduced, like, you've taken it to another level of depth, right? That's really super important. You mentioned gender and then of course race, and again back to the balancing in that, and like bringing that full-bodied experience of who you are to work, and then also playing with that, like how is that impacting my role, and when I speak up and how I communicate, and those things. That actually leads to the next question, quite really smoothly. So, how do you balance authenticity with caution communicating online, in a professional setting? Aaron.
A great question. I honestly think online can be tricky. When I grew up, they always taught us like the safety rules of like the internet, and those have always kind of like stuck by me. I think it's important to, I mean, your digital footprint is forever, so everything that you do on the internet will be there. And I think, while it is a good tool, I think you definitely have to be cautious in like the things you say. But too, there's another side where I use it as entertainment. I think there's a term called brain rot that I heavily identify with. I'm on like if I'm not working, I'm probably on TikTok or the internet, just like shutting my brain off and de-stressing.
Yeah. What say you, Andy?
Yeah,
Any
I mean,
thoughts?
I think it definitely depends on the forum, like there's kind of like a certain voice that is kind of acceptable to use on something like LinkedIn, which might be different from something from other social media like Instagram or something. So I think part of it is just kind of knowing what channel you're on and kind of what's gonna kind of what's expected, what's gonna play, what's gonna seem odd. I think those are good things to keep in mind when it comes to online communication. And if you're going back and forth with somebody, one to one, I think just kind of like feeling it out. If it's email, like I'll probably like follow somebody's lead, and if they throw an emoji in there, smiley face, maybe I'll use one at some point. If they're heavy on exclamation points, I'll maybe make sure to include one, at least one here and there, that kind of thing. So a lot of it is just kind of, I think for me, kind of just really taking things slow and kind of feeling things out.
Yeah, so it sounds like a kind of learning on the fly, right? Or learning as it goes. We started this conversation. We've actually kind of seen the evolution of communication in the workplace, from the calculators to the texting and the T9 texting to like even the pagers. And like it definitely has evolved. You mentioned Instagram and then other applications, and we know that those applications are like there's this overlap between the applications that we use in our personal life and then even in the workplace, right? So most companies will have social media and Twitter, and so there is this constant overlap. So I really think I love that you pointed that out, like just being aware of like what space you're in and kind of, being along for the ride and witnessing that evolution and being fully present, as it's happening. I think that's really cool. Actually, that brings me to the next poll. So, and I want to make sure that I get all this in, but we'll have some time here in a bit to kind of fully unpack and round out the conversation, because I want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to, maybe say something, or if we need to revisit one of the topics, or like really want to know what's resonating with people, like after we've gone through this. Okay, so the next poll is, what organizational structures can be great communication tools? So like Andy is kind of talking, what is your preference? I think it's important for us to kind of think about this and sit with this and, really unpack and explore, what works for us. Like, given everything that we've said, like who we are, given gender, given race, what works for me, right? Right. So looks like third-party apps is leading the pack right now. It's interesting. No one has selected emails. Oh, that's I think that's kind of funny. Emails can actually be a pain point for many. So I love this. I love this. Okay, we got meetings at 29%. Oh wow. So it looks like, if I don't know if this is gonna hold. Okay. It's going to say third-party apps like Asana, Teams, and Google Docs was tied with direct line communication, calling, and texting, but that's changed. Now it seems that Asana is leading at 40%. Give it just a couple more
Oh, I love
seconds.
emails. I'm so
I
sad.
know, right? No, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, it seems like emails is definitely not everyone's favorite. Tell me more. Say more about that, Liz, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sort of going back to when I say I step back and I think about things and then I come back to the conversation. I think I do the same thing with meetings and emails. Like I'll be in a meeting and I'll just be processing and thinking about it and being thoughtful during the meeting and listening. And then I'll go back to my desk and be like, okay, now I need to write it in the email of all my thoughts that I had and tell everyone. And I know it's not great, but sometimes I write out the email and then I just keep it for myself or something. But I recognize that it's not the best for everyone,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes just part of my thought process, and it's how we communicated back in the day. I mean, our internet wasn't good enough for video calls, so
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely understand that. And I think with the emails, I think we could probably all agree that when you're communicating, the thread gets lost, like the messages get pushed down, way down, And so, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Lily, how about you? What do you have a preference on what works for you in the workspace?
Yeah, I feel like with my team, given that we're so large and that we're a 24-hour run team within the US and outside of the US, we're big users of Slack and we have different channels for different things. And I feel like a lot of people use almost like the Slack channels, whether it's like specific channels or direct messages, as opposed to sending emails. And like emails are used to schedule and put meetings on the actual calendar. And then in those meetings, we're talking about the things. And then Slack messages are used for outside of like physical meeting times.
So, so so real quick, I'm gonna pull up. Not gonna share, but I'm gonna read through some of the insights of kind of what we're talking about, and I want to definitely give space to anyone who has maybe a final thought. So on today's so one of the first key takeaway, and this was mentioned by Dr. Chance, is that she was talking about subject matter experts using, explaining things in non-technical ways, right? Using plain spoken words as a way to make sure that people are understanding, right? And so that's kind of like intentionality. It makes me think about communicating with intention, right? Andy, you mentioned example of like nonverbal and verbal, or verbal nonverbal communication, and really the microaggression like that kind of happened in your example. and like that forced self-reflection, like how it can force you, making a mistake or, being in a situation where you feel like you maybe, created some distrust, can maybe force that moment of self-reflection. And then some of the miscommunication felt senses, things that we kind of mentioned. Brennan, you mentioned anxiety, and Liz, you mentioned embarrassment and a moment of feeling crippled, like, just based on like feeling like, things aren't being communicated to you, or you're not really understanding. Another important factor that came up, Dr. Chance mentioned neurodiversity, right, as a factor. And even someone in the comments mentioned this. If there is someone who is neurodiverse, then maybe their level of communication or understanding those norms that you kind of mentioned, Andy, the professional norms, and the way that they express themselves are a little bit different. So, that is in fact a factor, right? Neurodiversity. And to what degree do we embrace, or are we aware or conscious of that, as it's happening, in the workplace? And then also to authenticity. I pulled this out, that authenticity allows effective communication. I think that most of the panel, or everyone, pretty much agrees on that, as a point. And then most people carry the same personality at home and work. That's based on our poll. So I think that that's very interesting, because I didn't know if that would necessarily be the case, but it was a majority of people who attended here who said that that is the case. And then also being aware of gender, race, and the role that it plays. Liz and Brennan pointed that out, and I know that that could actually be a whole other webinar, right? Because that only really scratches the surface of probably a much needed conversation around how people have that lived experience and the impact and the role that it plays in communication. And so I think another one of the takeaways is that this idea of maybe compassion, psychological safety. Brendan's mentioned that a few times, and going above and beyond to create the space and just really be conscious and aware of what's happening in the moment. And then going back to the other poll, another thing that I think we kind of mentioned is that third-party apps seem to be the preference, the way that everyone wants to communicate, right? It seems to work. And I remember having this conversation a couple days ago, about the idea of assigning someone a task and setting the date. It gets a ping, so it's like two-fold communication, even though emails didn't win as the preference for everyone. Third-party app still has that component where it's built in, gives you a ping, and that generally works best. But the one thing I think that could be a major takeaway, and you guys let me know what you think, but this idea of using communication with intention, right? Being intentional about the ways that we communicate. Given everything that we've said, given everything that we said about who we are, how we show up. There may even be some self-awareness about the kind of week that we're having, our psychological state, how we're really doing, because those are the things that allow us to be our most authentic self. How do we show up in those spaces? And so, does anyone have any thought about that, the idea of communicating with intention?
I think one of the things that leaders can do is when when you put this culture out there, say like there's no stupid questions here. I want you to be open and honest. The leaders have to back that up, because I had a situation where it's like, this is a safe space, no stupid questions, and then I asked a stupid question, and someone laughed, and someone said, "Well, you should know that by now," and the leader in the room did nothing, and I was like,
Wow.
okay, well, that's not true. That's not a safe space, and
Yeah.
I, just withdrew. So
Yeah, and it erodes trust, right? So I
yeah,
think that's
exactly.
also a final nugget that leaders have to back up. That w- the motto, the notion, the theme, and like whatever it is that we preach in terms of our team, we have to actually model that and live that out. What other advice that anyone from the panel would you give to leadership? This idea of communication.
Yeah, I would just say welcome the idea and be intentional about, as a leader, you set the tone. So how you communicate, what you bring to the table, is going to either create that psychological, that safe space, or that, hey, I don't feel safe here, fight or flight at this point. The intentionality is so important because, I told the group earlier, my mom's retiring after 42 years of being a teacher in 2 weeks, and I just see the knowledge that baby boomers leaving the job market, how much of that we're losing. So I would just press everybody, be yourself. Just as much as I want to communicate, I want to learn from different generations. Being on this panel was kind of crazy at first because I went from being the young guy in the office to now there's a generation below me. So it's like, let's make sure that we're being our authentic selves, we're assuming the best, but that we're actually giving different perspectives to the company because that's the point of diversity in the workplace. That we want to give, all different perspectives so that ultimately we can create the best product for our consumers and create the best environment for our team members.
Yeah, absolutely love that point of giving our best to our companies, right? Giving our best, giving our best. But what does that look like, right? What does that look like for each of us? Because it is an individual experience, right? I think it is a combination of the things that we discussed today, right? Being aware, the degree, the environment, how you show up, all of that. I think that is all relative. Thank you all so much. I'm gonna lead with a final thought, and is our panel today reminded us that trust isn't just built by words. It's shaped by tone, timing, vulnerability, and the courage to ask. Whether you're leading a team or just starting out, communication is a craft, and we all keep learning. Thank you all so much. This has been a tremendous panel. I hope that everyone has taken away at least a few nuggets. My name is Dr. Mims. I'm with the Musai Group. On behalf of myself and Dr. Chance and all the partners involved, we want to thank you all for an amazing panel. Thank you so much, and you guys have a great day. Let's keep the conversation going. Peace to communication. Have a good one.
Bravo, bravo.